Ladies and gentlemen, today's performance will include terrible British accents, big Dickens energy, and the answer to what Victoria has been keeping secret this whole time. All this and more on Created Things.
Welcome to Created Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives and the only podcast that is single-handedly sparking a revival of interest in angelology in the state of Texas. I'm your host, Father Gabriel, Dominican priest, medievalist, guy who studies too much, and with me is my co-host, Jacob Flores Popchak, artist, psychotherapist, Florida man in the flesh. How are you doing?
I'm really good. I like being called a Florida man. There's a Disney resort, though, near here called the Grand Floridian, and I would like to be called that even more. Rather than a Florida man, I want to be called a Grand Floridian.
Grand Floridian. Don't you feel like, I mean, you've only been in Florida a few months. Like, do you feel like you're already a Grand Floridian?
That's all the time it's taken me to be more
to become a Grand
than
Floridian.
Any other Floridian. Yeah. No,
wow.
I mean, that's how great I am.
That's just it. Well, you're grand,
I
would say. Not really great. That would be a great Floridian. That would be different.
Right,
it's a whole different.
Grande.
Yeah, grande. That's,
like the Starbucks size.
Starbucks. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which size is that again? I always forget. I'm the obnoxious white guy who goes in and just orders a medium. I can't remember what their designations are.
This is incredible. It's incredibly confusing in Japan as well, where they have like it's just everyone is confused by everything. And they also have like an additional size, which I'd never seen in America.
Really?
Yeah, it's like bigger. But in the end, actually, it's just the same size as like a grande would be for us because, you know, they tend to serve things that are smaller. So you walk in, you order like the most American possible size, which is like, give me that bucket of coffee. Only you say it like in Japanese, but you're saying fake Starbucks Italian. And it's just everything about it. It's like, you know what? Let's stop.
That just fully feels like a microcosm of modernity to me.
Yeah.
We're talking about Japan. We're talking about Florida. Explain your intro. Why are we creating a renaissance of angelology in Texas specifically?
Yeah, specifically Texas because I just happened to be looking through our user stats, and I realized that 1 in 5 people who listen to this podcast live in Texas.
Seriously?
Yeah, 1 in 5. 1 in 5.
I did not notice that. Kyle, our audio engineer and producer, he sent me some stats where I guess like 2/3 of all our listeners are women.
Well,
which makes me feel really weird only because like there's so much better to listen to. And I just don't understand why you're all listening to us. Like we're just two gross little weird beard boys talking about art. Like we know something about a thing, and you guys could be listening to way cooler stuff, and I don't know why you're listening to us, but thank you.
I'm glad. You know, this is like every time I try to listen to an audiobook that isn't recorded by a British guy, or a British woman, I just think like, oh, what am I doing with my life? You know,
what is even the point of this?
What is even the point? Like I'll read American novels, and I just can't take it. I just can't take it, and it's not some sort of like, you know, David Attenborough, just like fetishization of English accents. It's just that like, because there are plenty of bad English readers in audiobooks and stuff like that as well. I just I kind of suspect that in America we don't, at least with like for instance audiobooks, we don't invest like labor into it. And so like we don't actually have people like acting the book. I mean like the actual sort of the particular kind of voice acting that's proper to reading out loud. We don't seem to really do that, where England does seem to do it a lot more.
I think that's changed a little bit with Audible. By the way, this podcast is brought to you. No, it's not brought to you by Audible.
Wait a second. We're switching brands already.
I wish we had an Audible sponsorship. I wish we had a Surfshark sponsorship. All these people, you go on YouTube, like there are basically 3 companies, I guess, that fund all of YouTube. And it's like Surfshark / NordVPN. It's freaking Audible, and it's what's it called? HelloFresh, the meal planning kit. And I'm like, do they have any money that doesn't just go directly into funding small YouTubers? So regardless, I would love some of that good HelloFresh, Surfshark, Audible money. But anyway, point being, I think that's changed a little bit with Audible because I had a subscription for a while and they hire like big celebrities to come in and read the classics to get people like reintroduced to those and stuff like that. So that's
they're not always good at it though. This is why I discovered I listened to a Scarlett Johansson recording of Alice in Wonderland.
I don't even know who that person is.
Scarlett Johansson? Yeah, you do. She's
Scarlett Johansson.
Joe, whatever. Like I said,
literally thought that you were talking about some like Russian performer or something.
You know, like Scarlett O'Hara. Come on. There's really that many syllables in her last name, Johansson?
I mean, that's how I've always heard it's pronounced. I
think you're just making
but it's definitely not a yo. It's a Joe for sure.
Well, that's how yo says it. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so Scarlett Johansson recorded a version of Alice in Wonderland, which was a complete disaster, by the way, because there's humor in the book that relies on being pronounced with a British accent.
Yeah.
That literally doesn't work if you don't have the kind of like swallowed R kind of thing and all of this. And it was just incredible. It's just like just plowing through these jokes that like no longer make sense, and you're just like, oh my gosh, stop.
My wife and I listened to an audio version of A Christmas Carol, not this past Christmas, but 2 Christmases ago, with audio by Tim Curry.
Oh,
who is like the greatest of us all. And my wife and I are obsessed with Tim Curry because he's been in every movie. It's truly crazy how many bad things he's lent his campy, like super intense British accent to. Some he's the Wild Thornberrys. He's the villain in not 1, but 2 Barbie movies. He's
Barbie movies. Wow,
don't even get me started on Barbie, a Nutcracker. And I mean, not to mention, Rocky Horror Picture Show and Muppet Treasure Island and all these camp classics. So when we heard that he was doing all of the voices in A Christmas Carol, we were like, this is going to be incredible. He gave a very like sober Shakespearean performance. I was so disappointed because I actually wanted it to be worse. Like you're saying, my experience with Audible was not as good as I wanted it to be. Mine was not as bad as I wanted it to be.
Isn't that sad? Well, so speaking of a confusing combination of good and bad, actually that does,
that's
believe
a
it or not,
flawless transition. My God. I
know it does kind of actually bring us to where we are today, which is we're following up on a conversation we had a while ago about angels that was provocatively titled Angels Part 1. This one is also provocatively conceived of as Angels Part 2.
But I did add, I'm in the little title on this, I did add Electric Boogaloo.
Oh, there we go.
Well,
which
to
is
make
fair.
it a little bit more provocative.
There it is.
So this is good. Technically Angels Part 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Electric Boogaloo. Good. Well, we'll have to make sure that we bring in some of that Electric Boogaloo, flavor, which is like blue raspberry flavor. It tastes just like blue raspberries.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The snozberries taste like snozberries, and the Electric Boogaloo tastes like blue raspberry Electric Boogaloo.
All of the above. Yeah. With and without blue raspberries.
Yeah.
So quick recap on Angels Part 1.
Sure.
We talked a little bit about different places in the Bible where angels come up, and specifically the way in which in those places in the Bible where we find angels, it's kind of intentionally confusing. Like sometimes they look like human beings, sometimes they're spoken about, sometimes they switch. It's unclear how many numbers of them there are in any given place. There is one place in the book of Revelation where an angel is described as flying, but that's actually the only one. And then there's these weird, powerful kind of prophetic visions of angels in like Isaiah and Ezekiel, and also in Revelation with like way too many wings and way too many eyes and like too many heads and wheels and all these kinds of things. So we have all these like really dramatic representations of them visually in the scriptures that then have like fired kind of Christian artistic imagination sort of forever. We talked a little bit about the way in which, of course, like, Christians don't have a monopoly on angel images. Like both what's found in the scriptures seems to be working with a lot of kind of cultural ideas from other religions around the area, and then other people make angel images. Basically, almost every religion has some kind of idea about angels, and then they represent them in various kinds of ways. So we kind of talked a little bit through different stages in art history, kind of stopping with the more or less the 17th, 18th century. The last thing that we were talking about was the putti, the chubby, naked baby angel with the wings, and the often in some of the most disturbing representations. Like if you go anywhere that got kind of like barfed all over by the Baroque, or especially the Rococo, like anywhere in Austria, some places in Germany, Rome, many places in Spain, like any place that was really kind of powerful in the like 17th and 18th century, and Catholic, it just like got barfed all over by the Baroque and the Rococo. And in some of these places you can see like there's this church in Vienna, I think it's the St. Michaelskirche, actually the St. Michael's Church, that's this big altarpiece, and it is really beautiful. It's like all gold, like these two giant gold pillars and stuff on either side. And if you look closely, it's just all made up of like naked baby heads with wings and stuff.
Yeah,
just like
that happens.
Yeah, it's like you beheaded like 600 angels for this thing, I guess, is what I'm hearing you say.
Not really. Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, you know me. I'm in kind of an active war with myself to never, ever, ever be a snob over anything or everything. But I will say, if there was one, and I'm sure it has artistic merit on its own, but I just personally speaking, with my own taste, I hate Rococo so much.
Yeah, bro. It's because it's the worst. Look at this. Everybody, I want you to pause for just a second and recognize what has just happened, which is that Jacob and I have agreed that a given artistic period is the worst ever made. That means officially that the Rococo has been blotted out from God's sight. Like this just was
there
gone.
you go. We have
blotted out from the face of the earth.
When this is like when the Planeteers sort of put their rings together and become Captain Planet. You and I, when we agree that something is bad, God also just sort of decides that it's bad.
Yeah.
No, again, I don't really know enough about Rococo to have a definitive judgment. I just know, like, subjectively, my own personal tastes. I hate it. I follow the Smithsonian on TikTok, and they were breaking down this set of cabinets, these Rococo cabinets that have been found in the former Shippen mansion in Philadelphia. Peggy Shippen seduces Benedict Arnold away from the American Legion and gets him to convert over the British side. And famously changes
so nothing
American
really
history.
bad happened.
Right, exactly. Because she was secretly spying for the British and was in love with someone else. It's all awesome and tristy and kind of Downton Abbey-ish. But my God, these cabinets were disgusting. I mean, they were so gaudy and just loud, and there was no one focal point, and it was just awful. And I can't imagine a whole room. I mean, I can imagine because I've seen it, but like just a whole room done up that way. If your cabinet's that loud, I don't know.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, and then you get to these churches that are like this, where it's this absolute kind of like horror vacui, they say, like a nature abhorring the vacuum, right? Where
I used to be in an alt punk band called Horror Vacui.
Yeah, that's actually legit. Anybody who's listening, if you want to start an alt horror punk band, do it. But like it's incredible. It's just like, well, I thought I saw a piece of blank wall, so I put 6 baby heads on it. and also I just sprayed cheap gilding on everything. It's like, okay.
Oh gosh. But hey, actually back to the Angels thing. I really appreciate your recap here. I want to throw in 2 cents of my own little recap because some of it's happened off air. So a lot of the reason we've had to do 2 episodes on Angels is because I decided to do that annoying thing that I promised I'd never do, where I brought in like my own personal confusions and issues into an episode. So we spent most of episode 1 talking kind of in the gray area between arts and then also the actual theology of angels, which I assume we'll do some of more today as well, which is by necessity. But a lot of that was to help me swallow the pill of angels, which I have historically struggled with. And one of the things you've really helped me understand on that episode and off air as well since then, and one of the things that I think is important to bring into this episode too, is, I had sort of framed a history of angels as I saw it, or a history of angels in art as I saw it. And you rightfully pointed out that it wasn't nearly as linear as I thought it was, that a lot of the different imagery that I was associating as being linear kind of overlapped with each other at different times. But my idea of that history, kind of the presupposition behind that history as I posed it, was that artists were depicting angels to illustrate something they wanted their audience to know about God. And while that is true to an extent, you have really helped me understand that the way angels appear, not just the way they're depicted, but the way angels appear, is so that God can help us understand him more. And you really helped me bridge that to the identity of God as artist in kind of a cool way that, realistically, you even mentioned off air, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting you at all, because I want to make sure I'm getting kind of your gist correct here. But like in the story of Abraham, when he's encountered by these angels, you sort of made the point that if God shows up to Abraham, that's going to explode his brain in half. He needs to kind of send these angels because this is the highest and craziest and biggest reality that Abraham can consider. And the way God allows angels, these bodiless, purely spiritual beings, to be seen by us is illustrative of how we need to see them in order to draw closer to God. And I think that's really cool, because I was framing this all from the artist's perspective of how are we as artists depicting angels. And I hadn't really shifted my gaze to how is God as the greatest artist depicting angels for the sake of his audience, us, as well. So I've appreciated that continuing conversation with you since we recorded episode 1. And I want to make sure that filters in here too, just because it's important to remember, God in all of this, and also God's identity as an artist in all of this, and his efforts to make himself understood through his art to us by all of this. I don't know. Is there anything you'd add to that? Did I get anything wrong there?
No, I think that's great. That's really helpful, because again, just to reemphasize, like the constant problem with visual depiction of angels is that they are pure spirit, is that they don't have bodies by their nature. Like that's what an angel is it's a bodiless, rational creature. Douglas
Adams would say it's just a sentient shade of the color blue seen through a prism.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah, exactly. So it's just necessarily going to pose these kinds of fascinating visual puzzles that always at some level have to answer the question of like what do we actually think these things are? Like who are these people? Which is to say, do I think the answer to this question is like, who are these people? Or do I think the answer to this question is, what are these weird creatures? Or do I think the answer to the question is, what is this symbolic figment of my imagination? Or like, what is this artifact of cultural memory? The actual question that I'm asking about angels, like, necessarily determines the way in which, as an artist, I can represent them.
Right. Well, and I think the answer, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think the answer to all of the hypothetical questions you just posited, what is this figment of my imagination? What are these people? Who are these people? What is the creature, et cetera, and so forth? The answer to all of those is just a simultaneous yes, because all of that is happening in my understanding of angels, in our understanding of angels. I was talking to a very, very dear friend of ours who was trying to kind of understand Our Lady of Guadalupe better.
Oh yeah, right.
And just Marian apparitions better in general. And this is, you ended up explaining to me angels the way I had sort of unknowingly explained Marian apparitions to him, where do we actually believe that the Virgin Mary historically is, a half Mayan, half European Spanish teenager wearing traditional Mayan garb? No, we don't. Do we believe that Mary appeared to Juan Diego that way because the schema in his mind and the perspectives in his mind appearing to him that way would help him to understand her and the theology of her and the theology of God beyond her better. Yeah. So I think that's interesting that, yes, the figments of our imagination, so to speak, are actually an important part of this, because angels necessarily and God necessarily has to appear to us in ways that we can understand. And if I'm a, prehistoric person in the Mesopotamia or in the Delta River Basin or wherever, and I'm used to seeing Proto-Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Persian kind of art with griffin heads and all these sorts of things, and an angel needs to appear to me, it's going to take on those forms so that I can understand it better. I'm starting to, where in episode 1 I resented the wishy-washiness of that, I'm now like fully down for it.
That's awesome. And there is something about it that it's both sort of using and fulfilling the way in which this kind of religious imagination, the mind is able to sort of conceive of the angel, but it also has with it like a pull to more, right? Like that's what's astounding. That's what's sort of shocking about the biblical representations of angels, because they are always kind of like using some things that you might expect if you're really knowledgeable about like the religious history of the time, but then also like kind of pulling it in this like wild and unimaginable additional direction, which is I think also really great. And I think that's something I kind of want to flag as we keep talking about like moving into the modern period and talking about and contemporary period and talking about angels is I think that's an interesting question about like not just the using familiar visual and symbolic concepts, but also like pushing into that like or pulling into that like actually other realm, which is the properly divine realm of who God is. I think it'd be interesting to kind of track that in modern and contemporary depictions of angels. Like, do they just do one or do they just do the other? Or like, can sometimes people manage to do both? Or anyway.
Maybe this is reductionist, but in comedy improv, there's this policy of yes and, right? If you run on stage and you say, here's a cup of squirrel juice, I can say, ew, squirrel juice is disgusting. Or I can say, squirrel juice is my favorite, but I can't say, no, that's not squirrel juice, because in doing so, I sort of end the scene, right? And so to defend against that tendency, there's this yes and rule of, I want to kind of greet everything with a yes and. Yes, that is squirrel juice, and here's a new fact that I'm contributing, or a new piece of information I'm contributing to the scene. And I feel like that kind of embodies, in maybe some way, what you're talking about with apparitions of any kind from God, whether it's a Marian apparition of an angel, an apparition of him. There's a yes to how we previously conceive these things, and there's this invitation to more embodied within it.
Right. Yeah. Divine apparition as improv comedy. I like this. Yes. And
that's the title of our forthcoming book, actually.
Excellent. How did you know?
Yeah. So yeah, no, that'd be really cool, because we did leave off on Rococo, and we want to be looking at, how artists are conceiving these things and how God is stretching us through looking at these things. We want to look at how maybe we are being invited now to revisit angels, maybe taking it into the future, some of these things. Is there anything you want to make sure we hit before we're done with this episode?
I've got some things I want to talk about, but
you got some little things up your little
sleeves. I got some things. Let's talk about some things. Yeah.
Some stuff and some things,
So I think where I'd like to start though is so let's jump the rest of the 18th century, because the 18th century again, barf.
We're just gonna skip it. We're just gonna skip Rococo.
No, we talked about it. There's nothing more to say. It's the worst.
It's just okay. All right.
Yeah,
that's fine.
No, there's nothing more to say. It's like naked baby heads and like gold, and that's all you need.
Before we get into that, no, seriously though, because we sort of ended last episode with what could artists have been trying to accomplish with these little baby angels, and they are so rampant now in terms of not Rococo art, but in terms of like grandma China statue on a mantle art. do you have any more theories after thinking about it in the few weeks since we last talked about it, about what the artists are trying to achieve? Because I posited it's the innocence of God, it's the mischievousness of God, it's the fact that, you know, we're moving from a time, especially in the Rococo phase, we're moving in this time where, you know, when Michelangelo paints God the Father, he's meaning to paint him very much as a dad in this very radical way at the time, but then centuries later, it's seen now as that guy looks too serious, right? So my theory was, you know, these angels are coming in to try to illustrate, hey, God is fun, God is fluffy, God is cute and innocent and mischievous, and you can be friends with him, right? And to good and bad degrees. Do you think that holds any water? Do you have any other theories of your own before we move on? I just don't want to not do justice to this very big swatch of people's experience of angel art.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I think, again, like, because there the emphasis is like, yeah, I mean, I think that all those things are happening with the putti, the small baby angels, heads attached to shoulders or not. And is that like, yeah, they're representing this innocence of coming to God, you know, that right, that and there, as you say, like that, like being holy doesn't mean being stuffy, that that it also doesn't have to be this kind of grand dignity. I think you definitely see it. I think it's fruitful to see it as a certain, when it's done from an intentionally Christian perspective. I think it does incorporate, it sort of presses really hard on that verse, like, let the little children come to me.
Sure.
That Christ says to his, and I mean, like, okay, I'm willing to put myself into the situation, like in that part of the gospel, all these kids are trying to come and just like whatever, climb all over Jesus, just because that's what kids do, and the disciples like are sort of pushing them away, and they're like, knock it off, get out of here, you know, and presumably getting angry as you do, and Jesus like interrupts, and he's like, guys, you are the problem. You are the problem. Like, the kids are not the problem. Actually, you are the problem. Right. And he says, you don't let the children come to me. Okay, and I mean, this is speaking to my hardened anti-Rococo heart here, is that like, this is part of the point, is like, don't police this that hard, like actually being able to that people for several hundred years sort of pressed really hard on the idea of like the little children coming to Christ as this perfect expression of innocence and purity and simplicity of heart and oneness with the divine will, that lacked all the kind of like wealth and dignity and refinement and education and class distinction and all those kinds of things that you know, split people from one another, and make people think the one set of people is better than another. And it just says like, no, this is actually the higher form of holiness.
Sure.
And they represent it actually not even as a human kind of holiness, but as a greater than a human kind of holiness here, as specifically as angels, which I do think. So like, you're right. Like I don't. It's not right for me just to dismiss the whole thing because I find it aesthetically unpleasing. Yeah, buddy, you are the worst. You hate babies.
Back off the Rococo, man. What do you hate, babies or something? You freaking mook.
It's true. You hate the Rococo. You hate babies. That's what it means.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. So there's a real theological insight there. I think it's very interesting how this, when it hits them, the kind of mass production era, I mean, even we talked a little bit last time, like even in the 17th and 18th century, there's definitely clear, the risk here for sentimentalism is pretty immense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of my favorite authors of all time is the British author P.G. Wodehouse.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he writes all these absolutely amazing comic novels. And in his novels, he will often speak about baby worship
Yeah, that's great.
Which will be like random people coming up to babies on the street and be like, oh, boo boo, oh, boo boo. Then everyone's sort of like playing with the baby for like, all this kind of stuff. And babies are great and they're worth playing around with, but there is like, there goes this, like thinking about the phenomenon of baby worship versus like loving a baby is, I think, a good example of like what happens with the Rococo and these kind of like pooty angels. Is like there's a legitimate celebration of the love of babies and the beauty of a baby and the that's as a perfect expression of holiness and innocence and simplicity and all the rest. But then it also can cross over into like statue baby worship,
right?
Basically.
Low key, lowercase I idolatry.
Yeah, a little bit, because like ultimately what I really like about this Raredos, this big gigantic thing behind the altar, is like, look at all these babies.
Right, babies. It stops, which is really important to mention, and that's not being nitpicky, because that was a big part of our discussion in episode 1 was when... And it was my main problem with the angel stuff is that I wasn't, and I guess still am not entirely confident where the line necessarily is between when I'm trying to depict an inevitable reality and then when everybody starts to take my depiction of that inevitable reality totally literally, and how dangerous that becomes. And you're basically saying that happens with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly in the... there are lots of steps and again, I think like already in the Rococo and Baroque periods, you see this kind of sentimentalism creeping in. It's already fully present, I should say.
We all know how much you love sentimentalism.
I love the sentiment. I love it.
You love the romantical sentiments.
I love it. And like, but then of course, like once you get to the mass production era, then you strip off the gold and you strip off like them. You place the marble with plastic, you strip off the gold and you replace that with, spray dyes or whatever. And then you get, or I don't remember. I don't know what Precious Moments dolls are made of.
Porcelain.
Some sort of porcelain. Yeah.
The early ones are porcelain, and I think the later ones are like plaster, like resin. But
okay. Yeah. So then it turns into like Precious Moments dolls and these kinds of things. And like, doesn't Mary Engelbert have like a bunch of like baby angel things? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, no, the one with the calendars. What's her name? Yeah. Where all the like hedgehog babies and angel babies. Andy Warhol also has some really fun like parodies of this, where he's he's drawing all these baby angels. Because again, he sort of artistically experimented with Catholicism all his life, and then really delved into it after he was shot. And all his baby angels are like farting and looking at each other's genitalia and stuff like this. And just like these very sort of crass parodies of it that are honestly delightful and would make great tattoos for anyone looking for one. But, so it does lend itself, like when it becomes that proliferated, it suddenly just starts lending itself to just explicit parody all the time. Cause you can't do anything else with it. It's so overly sentimental that you basically can't do anything not ironic with it after a certain point.
Right, exactly. And I think it's just worth recognizing like that there are modes of expressing emotion that like sometimes in history are very credible, and then in other times of history just like completely lose their credibility. So so like Charles Dickens, who's marvelous, and I don't mean to paint him with a broad brush, but Dickens
paint that boy.
He definitely has moments of like pretty extreme sentimentality, and even like big Dickens fans will just say like, yeah, you just kind of have to take the rough with the smooth,
I love big Dickens fans. There's nothing more that I love than a big Dickens fan.
That's exactly right. It's just a single entendre. That's the best part. There's no double entendre there. It's just one.
I'm such a child. God.
Well, you and Andy Warhol's dirty pooty, I guess,
I guess, yeah. No, you know what? Gosh darn it, I'm in good company. Me and Dickens and Andy Warhol, we're all hanging out together. That's not exactly a bad party.
So there's this scene in, I think the book is called Little Dorrit, where there's this like really emotional, just honestly incredibly sentimental scene where like the main character dies, and
Spoilers for a several 100-year-old book.
Yeah, exactly. Spoiler alert, y'all. I think it's Wilde who says like, but the whole thing is that the scene is like incredibly. It's supposed to make you cry. It's very emotional. It's like it's on and on and on and on. It's just tears, sentimentality, all the rest. I think it's Oscar Wilde who says like, only the hardest heart, when little Dorrit dies, would fail to laugh. Because already by that point it had become so like just the emotion
so trite.
It had become too much. I mean, to be honest, like some of these scenes with Dickens, it was kind of already too much from the beginning. But like, I mean, for us now, like post kind of 1980s irony in America, like just don't even try. Like you're just like these are just not things that you have access to unless you've like really diligently trained your mind to be able to like appropriate some other culture, time and places notion of like what proper emotions are, which okay, I mean you could if you just absolutely really 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 wanted to be able to cry when little Dorrit dies, then like okay good, go ahead, you know, but that seems I don't want a 19th century Englishman's sense of emotions, but you know, maybe you do.
More power to you, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's
I got a couple psych clients that I see who have some 18th century ideas of emotions. I think
beautiful.
I think there's some
wow, what a beautiful thing. They should start reading Charles Dickens. See if they cry at all the right places and don't laugh at all the wrong places. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I wonder. I sort of suspect that like Pootie, these child angels, I think are kind of like that, you know. I just think after, I mean, keeping in mind that this is now like 500 years or so of really intense. I mean, it's like the fad of of these like kind of naked baby angels and the like baby heads with wings and these kinds of things. I mean, that lasted from about 1500 until, you know, beginning of the early 20th century or so. So that's a long time. Maybe so 400 some years. And we're maybe about not even 100 years or so out from where it kind of stopped being visually, symbolically credible. So I just think like if a contemporary artist would say like, well, no, I'm going to like rediscover the like chubby naked baby angel for like Christian art and piety, I'd say maybe not worth it. maybe you're pushing water uphill for no reason.
No, see, now it feels like you posed to me a challenge, and I just can't back down from that. So
no, you can't do it. I mean, behold, I throw the gauntlet.
Yeah.
It's
you've told me I can't. You told me it's not possible to do something or not worth doing something, and now I feel like I have to prove you wrong. Exactly, but until I am able to prove you wrong, you wanted to move on to past the Rococo period into some other stuff.
See, this is why we have to move past the Rococo. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep complaining about it until like we have to stop the episode.
Well, and I'm trying to be better too about not getting so off topic that we turn things that really should be a half an hour episode into a 4-hour 2-parter. So I'm trying to keep us like.
So okay, so I want to jump forward to the late 19th century. There's a specific artist I want to kind of think with for just a second.
Sure.
His name is Abbott Henderson Thayer. It makes art in the kind of late 19th and early 20th century. He is American. He's from America. So he's this fascinating guy. He not a religious guy. He is a big follower of Ralph Waldo Emerson. So you'd say he's like a transcendentalist kind of thing. Passionately interested in beauty, passionately interested in making beauty, does not believe that's like divine beauty exists. Just there it is, you know? He gets in this interesting and very difficult place where in the kind of like late 1880s or so, he's lost a couple of his children.
Buddy.
His wife is like a sort of long-term and getting worse mental illness. And so she's sort of, she needs care and is having severe problems of her own. And they've lost a couple of children. Then they have two or three children who were alive, and he just kind of starts trying to paint his way in and through like everything that he's experiencing. And so what he starts to do is he starts to paint his own children, basically the surviving children, in all of these scenes that are very dramatically and he's a really talented sort of like late 19th century, early 20th century realist type painter, sort of semi-realist.
I was just about to ask, because I don't know this guy's work, if you could describe some of like his style,
so sort of semi-realist, not no marks of impressionism, no marks of he's right, he's painting for the most part before World War I, and so no marks of modernism or any stuff like that. So
sure,
there are these sort of stunning, not exactly classical, but very sort of richly conceived, somewhat realist paintings. And he starts to paint a lot of these images of his own children in these scenes kind of taken from traditional Renaissance representations in various ways. And he just starts putting wings on them.
Oh.
He just starts putting wings on them.
Okay.
Like he has a handful of paintings of a young woman, usually his actual daughter, just sort of posed, looking reflectively or whatever. Beautiful. I mean, just beautiful girl, and this beautiful paintings. And she just has wings. And there's all kinds of things like this. They're just these figures who just are kind of they're paused in contemplation, or they're reflecting or thinking, but then they just have wings.
Okay.
And there's something really marvelous about it, I think, because this is, as somebody who has had a lot of trauma, like a lot of tragedy, and is dealing with kind of like ongoing trauma and all of this, who doesn't believe in God, is taking these kind of Renaissance scenes that would normally be scenes of like the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist and all that stuff, and putting his own children in these pictures. He's trying to kind of reflect on who his children are, and the only way that he can capture the beauty of who his children are, and how much he loves them, and the splendor that he sees in them, is to paint them like saints, and then to in poses and tableau like saints, and to represent them as angels.
Wow. I love this as a follow. I mean, I'm not sure what else you have to say on this, because now I want to look into his art, but as a follow-up to what we were just saying about the pitfalls of the Rococo baby angels, I really dig this, because maybe part of what's making the Rococo baby angels so camp is their what's the right word? Their like disassociation, their detachment from, like, they start off, if you're right, as an exploration of the let the little children come unto me, but then it becomes sort of fetishized in and of themselves, not sexually, but aesthetically fetishized in and of themselves, so they kind of become divorced from what actual children are. And then you're pivoting us right out of that into, hey, this is the authentic way to actually look at the innocence of God through these innocent angels, is actually painting this guy's his own children, because there's this intimacy there, and there's this connection and attachment there that isn't present with just plaster baby head. Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that definitely is what happens. I think that's a really fair description. And I that's why I wanted to go to Thayer. Just, I mean, partly these paintings are some of my favorite 20th century paintings, and I just love his work. But I think it's so interesting that to kind of, if we could put it this way, it's not that he's intentionally trying to do this, but he manages to like recapture and express, as if for the first time, something very beautiful that had become lost to visual expression by being overplayed, by being overdone, by becoming kind of trite and camp, as you say. And he does it interesting, like, again, like this, he's not actually coming from a place of faith. Like, he's not actually trying to make a religious image. I'm not saying he's able to tell the truth because he doesn't believe in God, obviously, but what I love about it is that he doesn't, it's a little bit, but I love about it is that he doesn't start with a preconception. Like, oh, I'm going to play some angels, so I'm going to put some wings here, and then some babies, and then some drapery, and then some clouds, and whatever, you know. He wants to be able to show something of how beautiful his children are. He wants to be able to show something about how immense and huge his love for his children are, and how stunningly beautiful they are as people, in a way that he can see because he's their father, and that he wants to like have this whole visual language in order to do that. So it's not this a priori abstract, like, oh, I'm going to paint an angel now. It's like, I have to be able to understand better by means of my painting how beautiful these children are. And then like, as he digs into it, the only way that he can do it is by using representations of angels, like visual tropes of angels, which I think gets us like really dramatically, again, like we were talking about at the beginning, you know, the kind of like fulfilling the fullness of your own imagination and then stretching and pulling it.
Yeah.
In a way that gives it freedom that wasn't there before.
I really, really like this because of the intimacy that's implied, because it's getting back to the heart of why we need angels, which is to understand better God the Father and his relationship with us through his relationship to them. I also dig this, and I know this maybe isn't what you were intending to put out there, but it's where my brain goes. You know, there's this ongoing conversation that people keep returning to in Catholic creatives, which is, and I'm sure other places as well, I've been privy to other places as well, which is like, sort of, why can't Christians make good art? And that's obviously,
yeah,
you know, kind of a crappy, you know, broad brush to paint with. But there is this stereotype of if someone goes out and make a movie, it could be good, but if a Christian goes out and makes a movie, it's God's Not Dead and it sucks. And there's a lot that goes into why that happens, and we should probably do whole episodes on it. But one of the reasons is maybe what you're talking about here with this guy, that he's able to go in without preconception and explore angels, and then end up, because of his lack of conception and because of the absence of the baggage going in there, now he's designing this from this very intimate personal place, whereas so many Christians are coming into their art with preconceptions and agendas and ideas that they can't necessarily rid themselves from. And so there's less kind of personal authenticity. I don't know. I want your thoughts on that, but it does remind me, before I get your thoughts on that, you know, I'm mentioning Catholic creatives here, and I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to them. We are actually, this podcast is actually is sponsored by Catholic Creatives, and also Catholic.store. Catholic Creatives, for its part, it's an organization dedicated to igniting what they call a new renaissance of faith through prayer and through beauty and through the creative spirit, and fostering those things. So to do this, they're connecting and supporting and promoting artists and innovators and makers and storytellers from across the faith community. But it does take a community to bring big ideas like this to life. So by supporting our Patreon, you not only help this podcast, but you contribute directly to future workshops and summits and resources meant to support Catholic artists around the country, while getting an inside track on these activities with access to our member-only Facebook group. So to join, go to catholiccreatives.org/support. And in addition, I'd ask you to consider looking at the beautiful products from Catholic Creatives makers, artisans, and artists, which can be found at Catholic.store. I encourage you to not give your money to, you know, these big kinds of, you know, mass production type organizations that Father Gabriel and I are often discussing on this show, you know, cheap or heartless imitations of real art. You know, instead, try to support, you know, small business, try to support small local artists, small artists within the local community of of broader, Catholicism, by going to Catholic.store today and looking at some of those things. Lots of great ways to be a part of the community. Lots of great ways to facilitate the arts. But back to your thoughts on what I was saying before, Father Gabriel. I mean, could you elaborate on this idea just briefly, and then we'll get back to the artist himself on this idea of coming in without preconceived notion? I mean, it seems like that's even kind of what we're talking about with Abraham too, right? All these guys are kind of coming in without preconceived notion that allows them to see God more fully, or to see the angels more fully, all throughout the artistic tradition of angels.
Well, although interesting, I mean, yes, but at the same time, they're also like like we've been talking about, like God is profoundly in conversation with their preconceived notions.
Sure,
and like
that
again,
too,
like fulfilling and expanding, right? Pulling and pushing and making it be more. And I think there is that, like I suspect that what it is for a guy like Thayer, I think, is just that like he doesn't want to set a limit on what he sees. He wants to just look as deeply into this beautiful thing as he possibly can. And this beautiful thing being, for instance, like one of his own children, there is this like limitless horizon before him of like love that's not just a kind of reflection of his own emotional experience, and not that love is merely to be reduced to that, but that he just wants to go as much as he possibly can, and like, and it includes pulling out weird things that don't fit with the rest of his worldview, like angel wings and all these kinds of things, like representations of divine structures and stuff that they don't actually fit with his worldview, but he just has to do it, and it's the only way, right? There's a kind of like radical fearlessness and freedom there that says like, I am beholden to reality. Like reality is not beholden to me. And I desire to see it as deeply and richly as I possibly can. And I want to be able to make perceptible what it is that I've seen, or what I think that I like, the direction that I think I begin to see, by whatever means I can, by whatever means necessary. And I think like that's like this is what artists do. This is like the fullest richness of the desire and the labor, and it's just very easy to short circuit it, with like and so I can just go use some of these very familiar tropes. We're going to do this, or like, but it has to be nice, and so like I'm going to do this, right. Or like if I'm writing a play or whatever, like but I can't have people like use swears, and like but I and whatever, and then like suddenly things start to fall apart, right? Or you just use cheap tricks, like oh my gosh, suddenly like God comes in and like saves everybody, like this is why hot take, like I just despise Graham Greene and everything, all of his pomps and all of his false works, because
wait, which one's he again?
Graham Greene, he wrote The Power and the Glory and The End of the Affair.
Okay, this is not the same. Like this. I'm thinking of a different Greene who wrote like Looking for Alaska, and
I don't know who that is, but no,
okay,
it's not the same.
So different Greene. Seth Greene? I don't know now.
Vexed, complicated, mid 20th century English. I think English. Catholic ish. That's his whole drama. Is like he's like the It's Pat of Catholicism. It's like
that's a deep cut. Jeez.
Yeah, dang, I meant it. Don't worry. Yeah, so he I can't abide his works, because in the end they all have this just absolutely marionette kind of rigmarole that they move by, which is that like the main characters have to go like so dark, and they have to be so far away from God, and they just do bad things because they're bad. But then at the end,
it's like how they're advertising like the new Batman movie, the darkest Batman yet, and I'm like, is that a sales pitch? Not the best Batman, not the most interesting, just visually the darkest. Okay, all right.
Also the most insanely long Batman yet.
Honestly, dude.
It's insane, yeah. I just think like oh my gosh, now I'm thinking about Batman. What were we talking about?
we're talking about, just the oh God, don't make me recap this, but no, just the broader idea of this green guy,
Graham Greene,
kind of going through
he's just gonna,
and making
right. So like all of his guys are gonna be like so dark, but then like at the end, God's gonna come out and woo woo,
and God'll come out tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's just like they're gross, he's gross. And I think there's always these temptations for like Christian artists, is to sort of do that,
yeah, totally.
So I think maybe it's, I don't know. I hadn't intended to use angels as a kind of a lens on this, but I think you're right that actually angels, partly because in the late 20th and 21st century, it's a visual language that's not immediately intuitive for people. And a lot of the idea about who and what angels are is also not intuitive or not believed by many people,
evidenced by the last 2 episodes of this podcast.
Yeah. That like in the end they are this really interesting lens for like, how do you look at reality enough to be able to like see something interesting and say something interesting. But I do kind of want to follow through with that. So like that's one way in which like here's a success story, I think, of a man who really was able to make it work in a very profound way. But as we like I'd kind of want to push into the 20th and our own century actually a little bit more with like also actually reasoning as a different ray shooting out from like naked, chubby Rococo angels.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you also have this thing, and you brought this up in our last episode, that like you do see with angels kind of all along, but especially once people in the Renaissance get really big into like painting and sculpting these sort of big chipped bodies, the kind of like classical Grecian,
right.
Classical Roman type of the kind
very
of
strong, very buff, very
heroes.
beautiful. Yeah,
exactly. Then like you get those kinds of guys in angels too, and like skipping over like every possible step, there ends up being this hilarious and wild chain where it's like, okay, angels, well of course they're immaterial, but okay, we're gonna skip over that, but they're perfect. So when we represent them visually, of course they're going to have perfect bodies. And now like Baroque, what like Renaissance Baroque mannerism, like this is going to be like, so they're going to have rock hard, chipped David abs, obviously. And of course they're angels. And so if they're not wearing like a bed sheet, they're wearing their birthday suit. Because angels are, because they're pure and they're perfect, and so they have to be naked. This combines in way deep into as it's like launches into the 20th century with kind of interest in kitsch, interest in these sort of chubby baby angels and all these kinds of things. And what do we get? We get like perfect body, naked body, kitsch body, chubby body, sexy angels,
Victoria's Secret angels.
Exactly. Like this is like there's a whole company that basically has like a yearly line of just this, which is like sexy angels.
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't even think of that as a category of angels when we got into this, but you're so right.
Dude, and like why is it, at least when I was in college, which was a long time ago, but when I was in college, like basically every woman, I went to a state school, so there we are, but like basically every woman on Halloween went as like naughty nurse or naughty angel.
Right. Maybe a sexy cat thrown in there just, for a classic every once in a while.
Maybe a sexy cat, but like basically sexy angel, not like devil. That wasn't such a thing at the time, but like sexy angel.
No, the boy is the devil. He's the one who wears like the red horned headband, and then she goes as the sexy angel. That's
exactly.
That's the totally inexplicable gender breakdown.
It's just how it is. That's just how it goes, Which I just think is, it actually has this, I mean, you could say like, part of me just wants to say like, oh, well, modern era and like there's just everything is sex and blah, 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 blah. But I think that's too cheap, actually. Like,
it's definitely too cheap.
Because it is coming from this like Renaissance mannerist, like perfect bodies, perfect bros, perfect chicas, chubby, naked, adorable chica, baby, boy, what babies, and then we get sexy angels.
Yeah, you're super right, because there's another trend, because I didn't even think of the sexy angel as sort of a chapter in the story of angels in art. I did think of this other chapter that I want to talk about that's also 20th and 21st century. But before I get into that or even preview it, I think what we're talking about here is that it's at a certain point, with, the exception of guys like your artist that you mentioned who's painting his own children, there's less and less of a personal experience of spirituality, and so more and more of it becomes commentary on something someone else has done in regards to angels. So, people do all these Greco-Roman things. I want to comment on that artistically. It makes sense then to just continue that chain of just sexing it up a bit. You know what I mean? Like that actually is. That is a sensible and intellectually understandable continuation of that art tradition if you don't understand what that art tradition was trying to comment on, right? You're now commenting on a comment, which is an perfectly legitimate artistic thing to do. I mean, I don't want to harp on that. A lot of art is commenting on a comment, but that's what this is. And then the other one, I'll talk about it now. The big one that I see coming into the 20th and especially 21st century is angel as a snarky teenager.
Yeah, so, you're not my dad angels.
Right, you're not my dad angels, which I think are a proliferation of the baby angel, right? Because the second we start examining angels as a device to understand the innocence of kind of childhood, rather than understanding angels as a device to understand kind of the innocence of God and his love for the innocence of childhood, which is a semantic but important difference. Then we start to examine angels as a device for understanding our own relationship to fatherhood and fathers in general. And so you get this motif that's especially in someone in literature with Milton and Paradise Lost, but then really gets into like big TV shows and stuff. And I kind of want to do a whole episode on this. But there are all these TV shows where, especially stuff inspired by Neil Gaiman or Gaiman, I never know how to pronounce his name. But where angels are these figures that are like God's kids, and they're pissed off with him because maybe he's a bad dad, or maybe he's just like a distracted dad who's always just working on his pet project of Earth and humanity and whatever it is. And so we start to explore the patriarchy of religion and also just paternalism and our own dads by having, Satan not be the source of evil or, the essence of evil, but rather, he's just the son that God just didn't understand, man.
Gosh.
And I'm reminded of the Mountain Goats This Year song, where it's just like, God just doesn't understand me. And so I just got to drink scotch and play video games. And like that becomes the devil. And this becomes this whole artistic motif that you see in things from, again, Gaiman with the Lucifer comics, the Lucifer TV show, the Sabrina reboot that was done for Netflix, the Supernatural series on the CW that lasted for like 14 seasons or something ridiculous.
Oh wow!
And it can go back to like Milton in Paradise Lost, where for a while they were working on a movie with oh God, what's his name? Bradley Cooper as Satan of Paradise Lost. And it was just going to be like this chain smoking, like, Dad doesn't love me enough. I'm going to put some graffiti on the gates of heaven to get his attention kind of angel, which again, I'm not saying is necessarily bad or cheap. It's not a comment on what angels are, but it is a comment on a comment. It's a comment on a different artistic tradition. And so we're seeing these two things come into the 21st century, where the predominant experience of angels, I guess, becomes a little bit grandma's China statues, but anything that's not that is either sexy Victoria's Secret angel or you're not my dad angel, a la Neil Gaiman, something like Lucifer, or even what's it called? Or Good Omens.
Good Omens
is a great example of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just slinking around and kind of sexy, and I'm just smoking my cigarette and moving my shoulders a lot, and that's what a demon is. And I love that, but aesthetically, I love that. Not a commentary love to move
your shoulders a lot.
I do. Not a commentary on angels, but a commentary on artistic tradition. Which brings us kind of full circle around to why I was uncomfortable in episode 1, because again, there's so little definition in the public discourse or in the collective conscious about what is the difference, what is the line in the sand between what angels are and just what artists depict them as, to such a degree that now, like when you say angels, they're not even that thing anymore. It's like its own thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, a extreme example of this is the Buffy spin-off show Angel, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Where Angel
totally of that spirit
is a vampire. He's just named Angel,
right?
But the show there's some he'll be represented with like promo images and stuff, kind of with like suggestion of like black wings and these kinds of things. But he's a vampire,
Yeah.
So you're right. Like we've sort of the whole concept of the angel has been so kind of deracinated, that like in one thing it's almost like, we talked a little bit about how Christianity borrowed a lot from other religious traditions and stuff Judaism and Christianity like borrowed a lot from other religious traditions in ideas of angels and then like visual representations of angels. And then like in the 16th century especially, and then kind of moving forward with the again, like what's the Renaissance and what's being reborn is this like so-called rediscovery of classical stuff in art, kind of classical Greek and Roman statuary and artistic making styles and all that kind of stuff, which results in a rediscovery of a lot of ways of depicting like Eros as a chubby baby and stuff like this. And so there's a certain like reintegration of some of these like pre-Christian angel concepts. And I sort of wonder if in the end we've kind of like, we sort of like kept tipping the bucket like enough, and now we just kind of like tipped it all out, So we're sort of kind of talking about angels, but now it's like all just use in.
I don't know that I agree with you on that. I don't know that the momentum of the bucket allows for anything to spill out.
I mean, maybe not, but I guess
I do. Well, this is what I'm going to say, because we mentioned this last episode. I think we did. Maybe we joked about it off air. But Roma Downey goes and does in the 90s Touched by an Angel.
Oh, yeah.
Which is this bucket flip. So the bucket's flipped into sexy angels. The bucket's flipped into You're Not My Dad angels. And she then makes a show, which is kitsch and which is sentimental to a profound degree. But it is a commentary on those depictions of angels that actually brings it back around to a genuinely theological exploration. So
that's a fair point. Yeah.
Right. So the angel of death, for instance, in that show, regular character, super sexy. And he's like the kindest guy in the show because he's the guy who comes to you when you die and brings you to Christ. Right. And so there becomes this really interesting thing that I think I'm only bringing it up kind of as a challenge to other artists, where I don't think we've reached a dead end, actually. I think Touched by an Angel, as kitschy and as sentimental as it is actually a really good example of how you can look at how far afield we've gotten with the idea of angels and actually say, okay, I'm going to comment on that in such a way that it boomerangs back to an actual theological exploration again. And there are other examples of that, but Touched by an Angel is by far the funniest and the most kind of intense in its mission.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for breaking in with that, because I really appreciate that. That's a much more helpful mode of analysis than I was going. That's really helpful, because I think ultimately, and this is what's so interesting about angels and why I think they are I think artists in general can't let them go, and I think they are so valuable for Christian artists that we ought not let them go. Which is that inevitably one thing they do is that they actually express the artist and his or her culture's like thoughts about the body, thoughts about what eternity is, thoughts about who God is, thoughts about like what the Bible is and how the Bible works, because we're also going to be answering questions again, like we were talking about at the beginning, like who is an angel? Is an angel a who? Is an angel a what? Et cetera, et cetera. Because just like, think about it. One of the things, I think very strongly, one of the things that's often in the background of the like "you're not my dad" angels is this very standard trope that like heaven is boring, heaven is for boring people. Like Neil Gaiman is way into this. Like his bad angel, of course, both of his angels are good or bad, as the case may be, in Good Omens. But his bad angel,
no one is really truly good or bad. Father Gabriel, what is you talking about?
Thank you for just opening up my heart there. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Jesus was just nice, and no one's truly good or bad.
Oh, that's absolutely the worst part of that show. I threw my TV across the room when that came up.
Save it for another episode, boy. Save it. I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing.
So his bad angel says at one point that like something about like how hell has all the good composers, like Bach and Beethoven and this and that. And I just remember thinking like, I read this book obsessively as a kid. I read it a ton of times. As a
that makes so much sense.
Yeah, that should not surprise you in the slightest. Huge Neil Gaiman, huge Terry Pratchett fan. So there we go. And even as a kid, I remember like that just doesn't seem like that's probably true. I mean, like, I was a super devout Lutheran. Like, what do you mean? Mozart's complicated, but like Mozart's this like interesting dude. Like, all this stuff. It's just think like, but there is this strong idea that like heaven is boring, heaven is for squares, because people think like, well, basically God is boring, morality is boring, and so like people who have fun and are sexy are like bad, and God doesn't understand them, and like they have to be like "you're not my dad" angels or sexy angels, or sometimes you also get kind of a certain parody angels, so like fat naked angels who are like this. You get this like in the mid to late 20th century, like fat hairy naked dudes with wings, basically.
I gotta say I kind of missed the memo on that one. I don't know if I can recall any examples of that, but I'm also glad.
It was interesting. I was looking at this actually really lovely, really helpful German article talking about like giving it was for this big book on angels in Christian art, and had this really interesting chapter about like angels in the 20th century that specifically like, and it was German and it's based off a lot of German representations. So like, I mean, maybe we can indulge in German stereotypes if we want, but like, just gave a whole ton of examples of these like fat naked dude angels, which at least in Germany in the late 20th century was kind of a big deal. So I don't. By the way, caveat auditor, do not recommend doing a Google search for this.
No, probably not. But if you do, don't say we didn't warn you. XOXO gossip angel.
That's right. Gossip angel, naughty angel, sexy angel, fat angel. It's all there.
It's all there. It's all there. So here's what I want to wrap up by doing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I want to sort of do two things, and if we can do them at once, great. If we can't do them at once, screw you, listener. This could be a 2-hour podcast if we want to. We're the bosses. One, I want to comment on maybe any examples of angels that haven't neatly fit in so far that we just personally really love and draw inspiration from, or just think are aesthetically interesting. Either for good or bad reasons. And then I also want to give any thoughts, because again, this is not we say this all the time, this is not a moral podcast. This is an art podcast. And I like
Would you say this is an immoral podcast, Jacob?
I would say this is a wildly immoral art podcast. Right. But we're not speaking primarily theologically. We're speaking primarily artistically. And I always try to, including in the way we wrap every podcast by saying, go forth and create cool things. Like I want to always give some manner of loose creative prompt, not artificially, because like this podcast really does, and any discussion of art does become just kind of flaccid and useless if it doesn't lead to greater creativity and creation. And so if we can, I'd also like to throw in a few thoughts on maybe what artists can do to revisit this idea of angels in their own unique way and take us into a new era of depiction, because we are walking around with all this baggage. We're walking around with comment upon comment upon comment of how angels have been depicted, and parodies of parodies and hats on hats. I mean, just while you were talking, I was trying to think, what's that one movie that is simultaneously Sexy Angels and You're Not My Dead Angels, and it's like the microcosm of it, and I can't remember. I looked at that. Have you ever seen that movie Legion with Paul Bettany, or hear about it, where he's the sexiest Saint Michael, and God decides to send like thousands, like millions of angels, and their wings just like blot out the sky to just like kill humanity. But he decides to go like rebel against God, find the Antichrist, convince the Antichrist, who's like living in a shanty town in like Alabama or some crap. And like, so he's like shirtless and sweaty the whole time. And he's sexy and like fighting like all the other, and ridiculous. So there are all these, we're walking in with like a lot of artistic, not to mention spiritual baggage. And so as we're talking about our own kind of favorite depictions, maybe even from now, of how angels are depicted, people who are doing it right, so to speak, maybe we could also throw in just a couple of starting ideas, not all the ideas, but just starting ideas of things people can keep in mind to re-pursue this line of design, as it were.
Right. Yeah. I'd say on the latter point, that with angels, as with I think a lot of actually Christian visual ideas that have, most of which are going to have been played for a long time, and so they can easily become like tropes that you can't really hear anymore, but specifically with angels, I'd say they are necessary. Like how one chooses to depict them is so clearly affected by the answer of like, who is an angel, or is an angel a what or a who, and then like, what does that mean?
An angel is Doctor Who.
Doctor Who. I mean, of course, there's a really cool angels episode of Doctor Who where angels are these like, they're these like scary, super scary, like otherworldly demon creature things.
Yeah,
but they live in plaster statues, and you're like, of angels.
Right.
Like, okay, so there's all that. But I'd say like, so dive deeply into like what an angel is, I mean, in the way that makes sense for like you as a thinker, as an artist, as a person who encounters reality. So like, if you're Christian, like, probably a good place to start is the Bible, and just like, maybe you don't need somebody else to tell you what to think about them, but just like flip through and think really seriously about all these different ways in which angels appear in the scriptures, and like, I don't know, reflect on what the heck is happening there, and then like try to, if that just produces so many questions and so many contradictions and so many pressures in your mind, just like keep pressing on it and see if something springs out. That's one way, is to just kind of go straight there and see. But above all, with that, I'd say like, I should say, if just as it were kind of going back to the source of the scriptures isn't helpful enough, or doesn't kind of get some thoughts started but doesn't get everything going, then I personally, and this is probably just predilection, so I'm not saying that everyone has to do it, but I think going back through Christian art history until you find a place where the depictions of aliens start to look really alien and uncomfortable to you, that's probably
depictions of aliens. Oh, you mean depictions of angels?
The angels start to look really, but depictions of angels start to look,
aliens look alien and
look angel to you. Yeah, sorry. Where the depictions of angels starts to look really alien to you, and like you're not sure what's going on, and it's maybe even discomforting or confusing. That's probably a good place to start.
Ooh, frankly. I like that. That's a cool,
what I mean?
Prompt. I dig that.
Because like I think if we just sort of turn back the pages in our art history book to like the 19th century, or maybe even just to the Renaissance, it's gonna look so familiar that we're not gonna get that level of like alienation from our own concepts that we might need to be able to escape from something that's been so heavily encrusted like angels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I dig that, especially if you can do it through different artistic lenses. If there's anybody doing stuff like that you, especially now, that you think is doing it well, or people that maybe someone should like follow on Instagram or something, I'd love to hear. There's one person I keep thinking of, and I keep wanting to bring her up in both episodes, and I haven't gotten to. There's this artist, Angela Wang, who I might actually want to interview at some point. I don't think she's Catholic or necessarily even Christian, but I would love to interview. She's fantastic. She does these, she's very into like looking at Renaissance themes, but she does a lot of Bible stories, a lot of saint stories, and a lot of angel imagery, pulling from kind of Renaissance art designs, but doing it through the lens of Art Nouveau and anime. So she has these
I like all those things.
Very like she's this amazing image of like a Renaissance artist painting an angel that's like 8 times bigger than him that I love. That's like one of her most famous ones. She's got this really cool series of images of like this sort of anime brooding priest, but then like very legitimate and very like sincere depictions of angels and saints like appearing to him. It's really cool stuff, because I feel like maybe she's doing what you're describing, which is going back to a period that resonates with her on some level, perhaps because she likes it, perhaps because it makes her uncomfortable, and then revisiting it through art styles, which she can actually take it a step further with, which is always a cool idea, right? You know, whatever you as an artist happen to be good at, don't try to go ape what someone else did. Just say, hey, can I take the baton of what this artist did, of what this theologian did, and through my own sincere lens and through my own sincere exploration of this, particularly when we are talking about something spiritually, my own sincere relationship with God or relationship with angels, can I take this a step further with the particular talent that I have? I would definitely recommend a follow for her, though. Some of her stuff is a little weird, obviously, but that's what I like about it. It's her name is Angela Wang, but on social media she goes by I want to pronounce it Awanki, so AWANQI. And that's all her stuff there. She's very cool. Is there anybody else though that you can think of that you think, just even in terms of your own personal taste, is kind of doing it right or has the right idea with this artistic prompt that we're throwing out there?
You know, I can think, I know that there are lots of people. I'm sort of blanking on names right now. But
that's okay. Yeah. I sort of threw it on you. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Yeah. Maybe I can pull up some and you put up on the Instagram or something like that. But it's okay.
In lieu of an actual recommendation, we're just going to assume that Father Gabriel really recommends you go and watch the movie Legion starring Paul Bettany. It's very sexy.
The great theological masterpiece, Legion, sexy, naughty, God is not his dad, etc.
God is not his dad. No, but I like this. Any final thoughts to add on the artistic prompt elements of this? I think we've done a good job. Is there anything else we want to put out there for people as kind of parting thoughts or prayers? Or do we think we've hit it?
I think that's hitting it. I think if you ever, I'll just say as a kind of closing shot, that if you ever start to feel really badly about yourself as an artist, which I have heard can sometimes happen all the time, yeah. And you feel like, wow, I just have no ideas and everything I do is really bad. Do yourself a favor and take a brief, pull out an egg timer and set a timer to make sure that it's brief, because otherwise it could last way too long. Take a very brief trip into the very dark world of angel stock photos.
Oh my God.
And then
first of all, leave it to you for when I say, do you have any examples of people who are doing it right? You go, I'm drawing a blank, but I have about 58 of people who are doing it wrong that I would love to do episodes on. Second of all, we do want to do a whole episode on Christian stock photos, but give us the breakdown of what you're viewing here, because God, that wasn't even an aspect that I considered, and now I'm kind of horrified.
No, I won't. No, I want you to find this on your own, because I promise you, the only thing that won't surprise you is like how white everybody is.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
It's it's a beautiful world. I won't spoil it because it's so spoiled and unspoilable all on its own. I want you to go and to love it. And for now, go forth and create cool things.
You've been listening to Created Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives, hosted by Father Gabriel Toretta OP and Jacob Flores Popczak, produced by Jessica Flores Popczak and Kyle Meineke. To find out more about how you can support the podcast and other ventures for artists, visit catholiccreatives.org/support.